Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth part of Valeria. We are going to continue painting this bust of Big Child. In the last episode we saw how to paint the face and hair, and today we are going to work on the darker side of the armor. Remember that we are going to work on this side with less light than on the other side because we have the focus of light on the other side and we are going to add a light as a reflection, a magenta light reflection. We will see that later. Also, in the final part of the video, we will see how to start working on the shield. And remember that part 5 of Valeria is the last video of this month and we will have it in streaming format. So save the date and time. I am also convinced that you are going to love that part. Well, you can see how we started to create the first reflections with this quite dark blue-gray tone on this side of the armor. Of course, to get this effect, to get this darker side, we don't need the same amount of light, the same contrast between light and shadow as in the other side we worked on in the previous chapters. Because that light area is where we are going to place, as we said, the focus, the focal point. The strongest points of light is going to be located on the other side, and that is why this side is darker. You can also see how David took the chance and painted some other parts of the side with more light that were still unpainted. And little by little we are painting those reflections on all the armor plates with this dark bluish gray. By adding some more all rose, which is that lighter tone you see in the palette, we increase the contrast by adding more light. Also, you can see how we are changing the tonality of these reflections on this darker side, making these reflections much cooler with that blue and all rose, while in the other side we have more amount of yellow. Especially to add more warmth to all this part and to follow the light ambience that we are creating. We add again a new light to increase the contrast even more. And now we also changed the brush to a smaller brush to add smaller brush strokes and more detail. You can see how we are trying to draw lines with the brush strokes to generate that feeling of light reflection, a moving reflection of the metal of the armor. Now we are going to add flat earth to the palette, and we mix it with reddish brown from Vallejo and a little bit of blue to make it cooler and darker. To paint the golden parts of this shadow side of the armor, and also to add it as a base color to all the golden parts. And here we also have all the remaining parts with that base color, like the part of the center of the chest, those rings, and those golden elements. Adding some red to the mix that we have or that we have used for the grayish metal, we would begin to draw these more reddish magenta reflections. As you can see, it is a very grayish, reddish, pinkish tone, and we are going to add it mainly on the lower plates. As you can see, we are continuously checking the main view to see if we like the effect. We are going to add now wine red, which is a magenta or a quite cool red tone to saturate the mix even more and intensify the effect. Loading just a little bit of paint, the paint is not more diluted, we simply load less paint with the brush so that the brush downloads less paint, and we start drawing on top of these reflections that we have already added. We will tint them with this tone. See how we are going to continue with the same effect that we have already created on the face. We add this tone all over the surface, that is, we cover and at the same time we tint all the reflections that we have created. And we also add it on top of the darker surfaces, of those areas where we can still see that very dark tone. We are not going to try to cover all the dark surfaces, but we will try to tint some small dark surfaces with this tone. See how we have less and less dark surface. We are going to add now to the palette this quite dark reddish tone from Andrea. It is quite similar to wine red, but in this case it is a little bit less magenta and a little bit darker. You will see the difference here on this paper. This is AK's wine red, while this is Andrea's tone. As you can see, they are quite similar, but this new Andrea's tone is darker. Here you can also see some examples with less amount of paint and with the paint a little bit more diluted. This, for example, here is Vallejo's reddish brown, which as you can see is much browner. It is much less saturated. Let's say it has a greater amount of black and therefore it is also darker. This is mainly so that you can see those small differences between tones. It is quite interesting to know why we are going to use one and not the other. In this case, we use Andrea's tone because, being quite similar to AK, it is more reddish and will get a not so gold finish. The reason for painting this quite tall reddish magenta reflection on this side of the darkest area is mainly to balance that much warmer and yellowish light focus that we have just on the opposite side. Because this tone, magenta, or this quite cold red, is going to create a quite big contrast with that amount of yellow we have on the other side. Because yellow and purple, or violet, are complementary colors. In this case, we are using these tones of magenta that are quite close to purple and violet, which is the complementary color of yellow, and this way we are going to get those two sides, those two different lights. One will be the warmer ambience, and now this one, which is a different ambience or reflection. It doesn't really matter what this magenta color reflects, because we only want to create that contrast with the main light on the other side, to achieve a visually appealing finish. It will give us more color information, and it is also visually quite striking, and we also managed to make the whole armor less monotonous. Let's say we are using it mostly to balance all that yellow that we have on the other side. As you can see now, we have different tones in the palette: Vallejo's basic skin tone, Vallejo's black, flat earth, all rose, and now a little bit of salmon. Adding a small amount of this last one, we are going to add a new light, especially here in the shoulder, to increase the light and shadow contrast and to mark the stronger focus of light on this darker side of the armor. By adding those reddish magenta filters, those cold filters, we have muted those reflections that we painted to create the shiny metal effect, and now we push again to increase the contrast. We also take the chance to increase the contrast in other parts that are not as advanced. See how when we draw the light, giving it the shape of the metallic rings, we get the effect of cast shadow of the metallic rings over the metallic plate. We add wine red again, and we are going to use the airbrush to add different filters using wine red. We are going to add it mainly in those areas where we have already added those previous filters with a similar color, especially to intensify the effect and the color reflection. We also take the chance to tint all those different materials we have on this side, like the sleeve and the inside part of the armor plates, the deepest parts. See how we also add it to the neck area, and even the hair, the lower part of the hair. It is important to do this. David finds it easier to do this when he hasn't finished painting all these areas because it is very likely that we end up staining some areas with the airbrush. That's why he does this in the middle of the general work, because now he will take the brush again and we will finish all those areas that we have accidentally stained after using the airbrush. As you can see now, we add a small amount of yellow using flat earth and basic skin tone for these new points of light, because these areas, the higher areas of that darker side, are also going to receive a little bit of that warmer light we have on the other side, of the main focus of light. Remember that when we talk about the main focus of light, we mean the warmer focus of light. Here we create a darker shadow so that the change between the warmer light and the effect of that magenta or reddish reflection looks more natural, creating a somewhat darker area where the change from one light to another occurs. We increase the contrast by adding a bigger amount to this area. You can see that it is just a line, a small area where we will have no warm light or magenta information. We are just adding a line that will separate the two light sources. We add more amount of flat earth in this case to make that point of light a little bit warmer, because flat earth contains yellow. We also use this tone to adjust or continue advancing, for example, this area of the shoulder blade, because as we continue painting the whole bust, we are going to see that some areas will need more light or more shadow. We will have to adjust some areas. This area is a little bit too dark, so we are going to increase the light. Don't worry, because although it seems that we have advanced the piece a lot, what we have done is to paint and finish some parts, some plates. We have continued painting them in the same way. We have painted, for example, some golden parts like the rings or the sun area, and some other silver plates to continue advancing the whole bust. We have seen how to work on all these areas, so we just have to replicate the process in the rest of the areas. Don't worry, because the most interesting part of this is to make an analysis of why we place the shines where we place them, and we will see this in the final episode on the analysis of the project. Let's see now how to paint the shield. We start by making a sketch, we start drawing or placing the reflections as we have done in all those metallic areas of the armor, and we are going to work in the same way. We are going to repeat the process. See how in this area that you are seeing now, we add a very light reflection very close to the focus, and then we darken it. We almost erase it to place it in another place where we think it will look better. Remember that there are many different interpretations to achieve the non-metallic effect, and sometimes to correct or to modify the brightness can make the result look better. To achieve a good non-metallic metal effect, it is very important where we place the shines and shadows. We remind you that you can reduce the speed of the process in the YouTube video. This way you will be able to appreciate all the brushstroke work better. We are now going to add flat earth to the palette and burnt red, both from Vallejo. Mud green from Citadel, and flash gits, this quite intense and saturated yellow from Citadel. We have already used it for the gold areas. And we are going to mix them all to create our first light for the golden metallic areas of the shield. See how we are drawing all the different reflections on all this area. For example, this is why we didn't record the process of the sun that is in the center of the armor, because this metallic element that we are painting has the same shape and it's bigger, so we are going to see how to paint this area instead of the other one. We continue drawing the reflections. See how we are leaving those darker areas to create the metallic effect. We are also going to paint this line that separates the two silver metallic plates. Don't worry if you stain the surroundings at this point, we are simply drawing a sketch to continue working. Especially when it comes to where to place these reflections or what direction to give them, the drawing or the brushstroke that we are going to look for when creating these reflections will be conditioned by the main focus of light. Because the main focus of light is the one that is going to mark the non-metallic metal interpretation that we are going to make. That is to say, where we are going to place those reflections. In this case, which areas of the shield are going to be more illuminated and which are going to be darker. We always have to keep in mind the importance of the main focus. Especially the height of it, if it's much higher or if it's in the middle area, in this case if it's more tilted to the right or to the left. In our case it's more to the right. We add some blue now to the palette to get some color tones to add the base color to the moon area. We are going to work on the moon area with cooler tones, blue and green tones, and then we will add warmer tones to the sun. We also take the chance and we add the same color to the central medallion. Now we are going to get the tone for the sun area. As you can see, we are going for a reddish tone. The texture of this sun is quite peculiar. You can see that it has a lot of texture, it has lines. You will see how we are going to work on that area in a quite simple way. As you can see, what we are looking for right now is to create the general color scheme for the whole shield. Let's say it's a sketch to work on later. We use the same tone that we have used for the moon, we make it a little bit lighter and we start adding some lights to create the effect that this area is also made of metal. See how we are going to work adding a lot of texture because we want to make in this case a different metal both for the tone and also for the texture. We want it to be a very textured area. We draw these reflections a little bit more laterally to increase even more the metallic effect. While you finish watching how we add these first lights to the moon area, I say goodbye. I hope you liked this fourth part of Valeria, and also remember that you have a discount code to buy on Big Child's website. You will have the link to it in the description box of this video. We will see you in part 5. Remember, it will be a streaming. We are going to continue painting the shield, which we think is one of the most fun parts of the whole process of Valeria. I hope you liked it and we'll see you next day in the streaming. Bye!